Welcome back to Gerodynamics. Okay, so this is part 2 of the Robert F. Kennedy platform video. I realized the last one, I only covered 2 of his platform positions. I covered a bunch of stuff before I started that, so okay, but this one I really am going to try to be more concise with my review of his policy positions because I'd like to finish up his platform in this video. So let's try not to extend this to a third video. Here we go. Homeownership and the American Dream. Learn how Kennedy will offer government-backed 3% mortgages to rescue the first-time home buyers from skyrocketing prices. Kind of a big section for something that was really covered under the economic policy already. But I'll read his position and then I'll just briefly touch on it. Sorry, I was having some hiccups there. All right. The dream of homeownership is slipping away for many Americans with high mortgage rates, rising prices, and stagnant income. To make matters worse, venture capital firms and hedge funds are buying up single-family homes by the millions. As homeownership costs rise beyond reach, rents follow them into the stratosphere. American homeownership is declining at the highest rate since the Great Depression. We lost more than 1 million homeowners in 2021, more than in the housing crash of 2008, and then another million in 2022. The median home price has risen from $250,000 in 2019 to $400,000 in 2023. Mortgage interest rates have more than doubled since President Biden took office. This is a rise in interest rates combined with skyrocketing home prices has pushed the average monthly payment for someone buying a home from $1,050 in 2019 to over $2,600 per month. At the same time, take-home pay after inflation and taxes has fallen by 9%. At the current pace, by 2030, 60% of single-family homes will be owned by corporations. What this means is that homeownership is now out of reach for all but the top income bracket. Younger Americans in particular barely dream of ever owning a home. They face a future at the mercy of faceless corporate landlords who will raise rent to the highest levels in the market. To the highest level the market will bear. None of this is inevitable, though, as RFK Jr. Here, let me try to move my foot. As President RFK Jr. will enact a series of policies to put homeownership back within the reach of working families. Here's how. Tax-free 3% government-backed mortgage bonds to bring the mortgage interest rate back to 2019 levels and even lower. It's like having a rich uncle, Uncle Sam, who is willing to co-sign your mortgage because the financing will come from investors. The cost to taxpayers will be minimal. This measure alone will reduce monthly costs for the average home purchase by $1,000. Bring derelict land and buildings back online. Many cities have thousands of vacant lots and buildings that have been seized for tax arrears or other reasons. The Kennedy administration will incentivize local governments to bring city-owned land and buildings back onto the market. Zoning changes. We will encourage municipalities to change zoning laws to allow ancillary dwelling units, granny flats on more properties to make housing available, bring families together, and provide homeowners with rental income. More supply means lower prices. Tax code changes. Small changes to the tax code can make corporate investments in single-family homes uneconomic. For example, we can change business depreciation rules and reform the enterprise zones that have contributed so much to gentrification. Together, these changes will restore homeownership to tens of millions of Americans and lower costs for tens of millions more. We will get large corporations out of the single-family home business. All right, quickly. Goodness, I don't like that use of that term gentrification right there. He was kind of right, but gentrification has just this weird connotation to it. Anyways, I would not mind some sort of changes to the tax code that would de-incentivize large corporations from buying up mass amounts of property. More so, I would encourage the government to let these companies fail, because a large thing that we see is, like the Biden administration wanting to make sure companies like BlackRock can't fail. And so that would be the bigger route for me. But in general, I wouldn't be opposed to changes to the tax code that would de-incentivize the purchase of corporate homes. And this is coming from someone who would really like to see the tax code simplified. But while it is what it is, that's something I wouldn't be opposed to. And maybe that will help the process. A lot of these other things seem like spending issues that I'm not really going to be able to support too much. But cutting out the loopholes and the being able to, as he says, use business depreciation on these homes. I don't mind taking restrictions off zoning changes and allowing people to rent out more parts of their property if someone is willing to rent it. I don't mind encouraging local governments to release their properties to allow them to be reintegrated back into the market. I don't think that the tax-free 3% government-backed mortgage bonds are a good idea, but I would need to see more information on that. But in general, it doesn't sound like that's the right solution. And also, getting government involved, again, usually doesn't turn out well. So, okay. Moving on. In the forever wars. Yes, please. I think this is probably where I agree with him the most, but we'll see. Learn how Kennedy will unwind the military-industrial complex so we can invest our resources in the middle class. So I agree with half of it in that I agree with a lot of, getting out of these endless wars and reducing the size of the military and bringing our military back to defend our borders and our coasts, those sorts of things, which I'm sure he will touch on. But he just wants to take that money and spend it on other things. And I've already mentioned I don't agree with that. So, okay. In the long term, a nation's strength does not come from its armies. I disagree with him on that. Maybe I don't agree with him as much as I thought. America spends as much on weaponry as the next 9 nations combined, yet the country has grown weaker, not stronger, over the last 30 years. Even as its military technology has reigned supreme, America has been hollowed out from the inside. We cannot be a strong and secure nation when our infrastructure, industry, society, and economy are infirm. A high priority of a Kennedy administration will be to make America strong again. When a body is sick, it withdraws its energy from the extremities in order to nourish the vital organs. It is time to end the imperial project and attend to all that has been neglected. Crumbling cities, the antiquated railways, the failing water systems, the decaying infrastructure, the ailing economy. Annual defense-related spending is close to $1 trillion. We maintain 800 military bases around the world. The peace dividend that was supposed to come after the Berlin Wall fell has never been redeemed. Now we have another chance. America cannot be an empire abroad and continue to be democracy at home. Okay. As President Robert F. Kennedy will start the process of unwinding empire, we will bring the troops home. Agree with him. We will stop racking up unpayable debt to fight one war after another. Agree. The military will return to its proper role of defending our country. We will end the proxy war, bombing campaigns, covert operations, coups, paramilitaries, and everything else that has become so normal most people don't know it's happening. Agree. But it's happening, a constant drain on our strength. It's time to come home and restore this country. This, 100%, I agree with this whole thing. And I think we can have a strong military and a strong defense and still do these things. Okay. In Ukraine, the most important priority is to end the suffering of the Ukrainian people, victims of a brutal Russian invasion and also victims of American geopolitical machinations going back to at least to 2014. We must first get clear, is our mission to help the brave Ukrainians defend their sovereignty, or is it to use Ukraine as a pawn to weaken Russia? Kennedy will choose the first. He will find a diplomatic solution that brings peace to Ukraine and brings our resources back where they belong. We will offer to withdraw our troops and nuclear-capable missiles from Russia's border. Russia will withdraw its troops from Ukraine and guarantee its freedom and independence. UN peacekeepers will guarantee peace to the Russian-speaking eastern regions. We will put an end to this war. We will put an end to the suffering of the Ukrainian people. That will be the start of the broader program of demilitarization of all countries. it might be, you know, having too much hope in that. But I think it's the right thing to have hope in. I think that he is probably right in that if the United States backed off and, you know, allowed for things to be more peaceful in the region, that Russia would probably end the invasion. You know, that whether or not they're going to give up that the Russian speaking territories is, I don't know if that is possible, and so that's a big hindrance to peace. But I think that if we pull out, at least they can start talking about that more. Okay. We have to stop seeing the world in terms of enemies and adversaries. As John Quincy Adams wrote, Americans cannot go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. Please. Kennedy will revive a lost thread of American foreign policy, thinking the one championed by his uncle, John F. Kennedy, who over his 1,000 days in office had become a firm anti-imperialist. He wanted to exit Vietnam. He defied the Joint Chiefs of Staff and refused to bomb Cuba, thus saving us from nuclear Armageddon. He wanted to reverse the imperialistic policies of Truman and Eisenhower, rein in the CIA, and support freedom movements around the world. He wanted to revive Roosevelt's impulse to dissolve the British Empire rather than take it over. John F. Kennedy's vision was tragically cut short by assassin's bullet, but now we have another chance. The country is ailing, yes, but underneath there is vitality still. America is a land rich in resources, creativity, and intelligence. We just need to get serious about healing our society to become strong again from the inside. America was once an inspiration to the world, a beacon of freedom and democracy. Our priority will be nothing less than to restore our moral leadership. We will lead by example. When a warlike imperial nation disarms of its own accord, it sets a template for peace everywhere. It's not too late for us to voluntarily let go of empire and serve peace instead, as a strong and healthy nation. I agree with him. Again, might be, you know, hopeful, too hopeful, but I think that this is the right path to go down. I think that we could, you know, return to a foreign policy that's more reasonable, where we are willing to defend our allies, we are willing to defend ourselves, but we will not get involved if it's not necessary, and we will not be starting these problems for sure. All right, let's go. Moving on. Making much better progress this time. All right, the humanitarian crisis at our southern border. Learn how Kennedy will secure the border and save our cities from the crippling migrant crisis. The humanitarian crisis at our southern border. Robert F. Kennedy sees the situation at the border primarily as a humanitarian crisis. It is a crisis that has spread far beyond the border as a flood of migrants has overwhelmed the resources of cities as far away as New York. The suffering of the migrants at the hands of drug cartels, human traffickers, and exploitative employers is heartbreaking. As President Kennedy is going to end the humanitarian crisis, starting with its most immediate cause, an uncontrolled border. As he seals the border to illegal immigration, his administration will enact deeper reforms to stem illegal migration in the long term, while expanding lawful, orderly immigration according to principles of justice and fairness. We must recognize that the foremost victims of a porous, chaotic border are the immigrants themselves. He's right. Compassion and decency demand that we do not allow the current situation to continue. Overview. Ruthless crime cartels have woven drugs, immigration, and human trafficking together into a multi-billion-dollar business. Biden administration policy has greatly exacerbated the situation. The border is out of control. Immigration is being administered by cartels, not our government. Just as a cell has a membrane, a country must have borders or it will disintegrate. Our policy will be first, to get the border under control. Second, to work with other countries to stem the tide of migrants. Third, to fully fund and prioritize the administrative infrastructure for lawful, orderly immigration to this country. A humanitarian, economic, and public security nightmare. The criminal cartels that now control immigration across the Mexican border exact a high price. Migrants are routinely robbed, raped, kidnapped, sex trafficked. These horrors are happening systemically and at scale. The whereabouts of some 85,000 children who have been separated from their parents are unknown. In May, a stash house with 135 kidnapped migrants was liberated just across the border in San Luis. For everyone that is discovered, many more operate undetected. Our unregulated border is not compassionate. It is an open opportunity for the worst kinds of organized crime. The Mexican cartels controlling immigration are as ruthless in this business as they are in the drug business. Gang violence all along the border has spiked as the cartels vie for turf through assassination and torture. The Mexican state of Sonora recorded 1,765 murders in 2022 and many unsolved disappearances. The Mexican government's official tally of disappearances now approaches 100,000. The civil disorder is encroaching into the U.S. as destitute migrants flood American cities, sleeping on sidewalks and overwhelming humanitarian resources. Here, too, they are easy prey for criminals. Fentanyl and methamphetamines are flooding into the country across the border along with the migrants. That is the part of cartels' integrated business model. Because migrants have no documentation, they have no bargaining power or recourse when employers take advantage of them. They work for $5 or $6 an hour. They exist as a permanent bottom layer of a shadow economy from which it's almost impossible to escape. A pool of cheap, exploitable labor lowers the floor for all labor, putting downward pressure on wages and harming the American working class. As a young man, RFK Jr. had the honor to work with Cesar Chavez. He understood that farm laborers' conditions would never improve when endless new busloads of undocumented immigrants were available to replace any workers who tried to bargain for better working conditions. He was no xenophobe. Immigration is good for this country. It's unlawful, disorderly immigration that harms migrants and undercuts American workers. In the long term, perhaps the most pernicious effect of the current border chaos is that criminal infrastructure of well-financed institutionalized cartels is taking hold, corrupting government officials and insinuating itself into society. Just as prohibition was a tremendous boon to organized crime, birthing the American mafia of legend, so also does the border situation provide a financial foundation for criminal organizations that could persist of decades. Jeez, okay, this is really long. All right, let's keep going. Tough and humanitarian policy. The first step toward fixing this situation is to reassert control over our border. Today, there is no control, no effective policy, and as a result, there is a humanitarian, security, and economic disaster. There are two ways people enter this country illegally. One way is by sneaking in, the other is by simply walking across at an entry point, claiming asylum, and disappearing. We have to address both. If we only shut down the asylum route, they will sneak across instead. If we only seal the border, they will overwhelm asylum processing resources. We must end both simultaneously. To accomplish this, the Kennedy administration will pursue the following policies. Tighten border security to regain control over the border. We will use technology that was installed at the border, then dismantled by the Biden administration, such as cameras, lights, and motion detectors, coupled with physical barriers in key areas. There is no need to build a wall across the entire 2,000-mile border. By the way, Trump doesn't say that either. It's not a wall across the entire border. Okay, we have the technology to prevent people from getting through undetected. We can control the border. We have the technology. We can deploy the personnel. All we need is the will. Get on top of asylum claims. We have to fully fund courts, services, and border agencies to allow immigration in accordance with the U.S. law and deny non-compliant access, and appoint more judges to handle asylum cases. There are woefully few asylum judges to process even the legitimate claims of political refugees. If claimants of political asylum knew their case would be heard swiftly and that specious claims would be met with swift deportation, the cartel's business model would fail. There are 1.6 million immigrants living in the U.S. while they wait their asylum hearing. Fewer than 15% will be approved. We need to appoint hundreds more judges to appeal with this backlog and to ensure that the newly arriving immigrants get a hearing before being admitted to the U.S. And that could be a temporary thing. You can go in, you can clear up this backlog, and then you can reduce the amount of judges assigned to this role to handle them as they come in, rather than, because clearing up the backlog is obviously going to take a lot more help. But keeping up on it wouldn't require that many. All right. This is a common sense solution that can transcend partisan rhetoric, rancor. Democrats will support swift attention to asylum claims so that we meet our humanitarian obligations. Republicans will support an end to the flow of millions of unheard asylum claimants into the U.S. on their own reconnaissance, kind of like it was under Trump. Migrants will know that their case will be heard at the border, and they will not be let through unless it is approved. Deciding to spend a lifetime of savings and risk injury, rape, and death to make this journey is the biggest decision of most migrants' lives. They do not make this kind of decision in a vacuum. We must give them forewarning that we are hiring hundreds more judges, and they can no longer expect to be let into the country due to judicial delays. We will work with the Mexican government to stem the flow of transit migration through Mexico. We have to cultivate more positive relationships with Mexico. Work closely with its people and government who desperately want to be free of the plague of cartel violence. Together, these three policies will end the business model of cartels. When we also expand legal immigration, migrants will rationally choose the legal path instead of putting their families' lives at the mercy of criminals. Compare this giant policy to Trump, and it's almost identical. So keep that in mind when a lot of the rhetoric that's thrown at Trump. Trump isn't a racist. RFK is not a racist. These are common sense things that need to be implemented to be able to solve this problem. The only person who doesn't want to do that is Biden. So, all right. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this one. It's very detailed, and I read through it, and time is ticking. I agree with most, if not all of this. It's definitely a good policy, definitely good positions. I see one thing that maybe I want to address. There's probably more, but I'll just focus on this and then move on. $5 or $6 an hour for the wage of migrants, and it calls that as exploitative. It's not necessarily exploitative if that is what they need to be able to take home and support their family. Now, mind you, if they're just basically working to repay the people who got them into this country legally, that that they were trafficked into this country, and they're working $5 to $6 an hour just so they can pay those people back, then that's a different story. But if they came here of their own accord through a legal immigration process, and those are the wages that they need to be able to support their families at home, and everything's legal and on the up and up. Honestly, I don't think it would be that low. I don't think it would be $5 or $6. But if that was the agreement and they were willing to work for that and they weren't being exploited, there's nothing wrong with that. That's my only discrepancy on that. Okay, moving on. Let's do this. Oof, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if I can read everything. This is going to take too long. All right. Best environmental president in American history. Learn how Kennedy will protect our environment from corporate corruption and contamination. All right. Yeah, it's too much. Let's just kind of touch on this top section here. A plan to protect our environment from corporate corruption and contamination. RFK Jr. named Time Magazine's Hero for the Planet will be the greatest environmental president in American history. In 40 years as an environmental attorney, Kennedy fought and won lawsuits against hundreds of corporations and government agencies. He sued Mobil Oil to reverse its pollution in the Hudson River, making it safe to swim and fish again. He sued DuPont, Mitsubishi, and Ford to force them to clean up chemical spills. He sued Monsanto on behalf of farm workers and families who develop cancer from toxic pesticides. And here's his quote: "I don't want my children growing up in a world where there are no commercial fishermen, and where we've lost touch with seasons and tides and things that connect us to 10,000 generations of human beings that were here before laptops, and that connect us ultimately to God. God communicates with us through many vectors, none more than creation." All right, so I'm not going to read everything in this section here. Basically, if you are looking for a president that is going to be on the side of the environment, and that is your primary issue or one of your primary issues, RFK is probably the candidate for you. His track record speaks for itself. I don't agree with him on everything when it comes to the environment, but I trust him more than most to actually be concerned about the environment and to look for the best common sense solutions to ride the line between protecting the environment and not destroying the economy. All right, moving on. In the chronic disease epidemic, he touched on this previously, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. Let's see what he says. The current generation is the sickest in American history. When John F. Kennedy was president, 6% of American kids had chronic health conditions. Today it's 60%. Rates of autoimmune disease, diabetes, ADD and ADHD, autism, obesity, asthma, food allergies, and other chronic health conditions have been skyrocketing, yet no political candidate has made this an issue. They all take it for granted as normal, with one exception, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. When I'm president, I'm going to end the chronic disease epidemic in this country. If I have not significantly dropped the level of chronic disease in our children by the end of my first term, I do not want you to re-elect me. This is something similar to what Biden said about cancer when he was elected, and as you see, no one talks about that anymore. I love his hope and desire to improve things. It is a tough problem, and I'm sure he will make it a priority to try to make things better. I see why most candidates don't make this topic though, because it's a long game plan. So having him solve it or make huge progress in 4 years, I have doubts, but I encourage it. I encourage him trying to find the solutions. All right, moving on. Sorry, there's just too many topics here for me to read everything, and so I would encourage you guys to go into his webpage and read in detail the ones that I am not reading in full. He's a great candidate. I just disagree with him on a lot. Okay. Regenerating America's soil, farms, and food. Quite literally, soil is the foundation of our nation, and America's soils have been poisoned, eroded, and depleted for a century. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is going to reverse that. The chemical industrial agriculture that has destroyed family farms has also brought us chronic disease, ecological damage, polluted waters, and even higher food prices. The solution to many Americans' problems is right under our feet. And so this goes hand in hand with multiple other policies that are near and dear to him. Again, if these are issues that are near and dear to you, you should really be considering voting for this man, because you're not going to get any of this from Biden. So there you go. And I know people like Thomas Massey and some other of our representatives that are farmers probably are going to be more aligned with Robert F. Kennedy on these issues than anybody else, and I support them and I agree with them. I live in an agricultural area of California, and I agree. I think that these do need some focus. All right. Politics, as usual, has failed the black community. For too long, the levers of power in Washington have changed hands between Republicans and Democrats without meaningful change coming to the black community. Things will be different with an independent Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has spent 40 years fiercely protecting minority communities. In Kennedy's first case as... Come on, Serena. In Kennedy's first case as an environmental attorney, he represented the NAACP in its fight to stop a garbage station in Ossining, New York. He has always been there for vulnerable communities, from the Bronx to indigenous people in North and South America. Let me touch on the sections of this as opposed to reading them. He talks about Operation Phoenix, which he is a part of, I believe, or at least supports it, and the tangibles associated with that. He talks about justice, and so finding additional justice reforms, police reforms, those things. Justice for black farmers, prison reform, environmental justice. He talks about an American Dream for All, AmeriCorps, and the new GI Bill for community service. student debt relief, which we've talked about, home ownership, which we've talked about, homelessness. There's no American dream for those living in the nightmare of homelessness, which disproportionately affects the black community. Kennedy will push to address root causes of homelessness and expand wraparound services. As someone who is highly knowledgeable about the problems with homelessness, my girlfriend also works directly with the homeless communities. This is something near and dear to me, but it's also something that's completely misunderstood by most people. Hopefully not Mr. RFK Jr. The solutions that are often put forward aren't what are needed. So look into that issue further. He just has a brief statement on it here. I would like to see some of his more fleshed out positions on that. But moving on. Righting old wrongs is long overdue for Native Americans. Okay, this should be interesting. Let's see. This is a little long. May not read the whole thing. These kinds of conditions can be permitted to exist in the United States. Cannot be permitted to exist. Okay, there we go. That makes sense. Robert F. Kennedy, after seeing the impoverished living conditions on the Pine Ridge Reservation, Robert F. Kennedy inherited from his father a deep commitment to improving the lives of Native Americans. Okay. Under Kennedy administration, historic wrongdoings to Native Americans will be addressed and made right. The spirit as well as the letter of treaties must be honored as the highest law of the land. The need for restoration of illegally taken lands and resources, compensation for broken treaties. While we know some of the problems in Indian country, we will work in partnership with Native American leaders to learn more and define the solutions. All right. Okay. So he wants to, try to improve their current situation, and fix some of the issues that were caused by breaking of treaties, those sorts of things. Okay. Restore our rights. Oof. Okay. Oh, it's not super long. Okay, good. Restore our rights. Let's see. Our administration will make it a top priority to protect and restore the fundamental civil liberties enshrined in the Bill of Rights that hold the essence of what America can be. These liberties have endured constant assault for more than 20 years, starting with the Bush-Cheney War on Terror. Definitely wasn't starting with the Bush-Cheney War on Terror. Long before that, but I think what he means is him starting with it. And accelerating in the era of COVID lockdowns. Freedom of speech is the capstone of all other rights and freedoms. Once a government has the power to silence its opponents, no other right is safe. We will therefore dismantle the censorship industrial complex in which big tech censors, deplatforms, shadow bans, and algorithmically suppresses any person or opinion the government asks them to. We will respect the right to privacy and freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures by ending mass surveillance of American citizens and the abuse of civil asset forfeiture. We will make sure that the COVID-era suspension of the right to assembly, free trial, or trial by your jury, and freedom of worship will never happen again. Thank you. The same for the right to property. During COVID, 3.4 million businesses were forced to close. Many of them, including 60% of black-owned businesses, will never reopen. The free flow of information is the sunlight and water and fertilizer for democracy. Robert F. Kennedy. Kennedy administration will respect American citizens and stop treating them like suspects and school children. We will stop manipulating the public with propaganda and targeted leaks. We will never weaponize the law against the political opponents, nor hold our own officials above the law. We will return the intelligence agencies to their proper role as protectors, not violators of liberty. We will also take special care to ensure the civil liberties of minorities and the people. We will end the failed war on drugs and grant amnesty to nonviolent drug offenders. We will shut the school-to-prison pipeline and transition prisons away from a punishment paradigm to a rehabilitation paradigm. Prisons will be an invention in life gone wrong and a way to prevent offenders from harming others again. Instead of defunding the police, we will transform the police. We will incentivize them to prevent violence, not make unnecessary arrests. We will train them in de-escalation and mediation skills and partner them with neighborhood organizations. No longer will the relationship to the public be adversarial. They will focus their attention on serious crime, not harassing ordinary people. I like Trump's positions on these things. They're pretty good. I really, really like Chase Oliver's positions, obviously, on these things. But Robert F. Kennedy's right up there with him. Robert F. Kennedy is probably one of the strongest proponents for civil liberties, for individual rights, for protecting us from the overreaches of government. And he's definitely one of the people I would trust the most in that position as president when it comes to these things specifically. So keep that in mind. These are very important issues, and definitely some of the strongest that I see from RFK. All right, moving on. Veterans must be a top priority. What time are we at? Yeah. I think I'm going to be able to finish this up. Let's make it quick. Veterans must be our top priority. Let's see here. Since the terrorist attacks on 9/11, American servicemen and women have been called upon to support a state of near perpetual war in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's true. I'm not going to read this entire thing. It says a seat at the table. It wants to have veterans, help make policies. Mr. Kennedy will protect your benefits and optimize the VA. Okay. And just in general, I agree with him. The veterans need to be taken care of far better than we have been taking care of them. And we need to prevent further future conflicts that will create more of these tough situations and people in these kind of conditions. All right, moving on. Expand AmeriCorps. Okay, I mean, that's what he says here. It says expand AmeriCorps. I don't want to go into detail about this, but definitely read up on it. If you're interested in AmeriCorps, he talks about it here. More choices, more life. Okay. Abortion is one of the most divisive issues in American politics. We've been offered two positions, pro-life and pro-choice, with hardly any room between or outside of them. This wedge issue keeps Americans fighting with each other and destroys our most promising alliances. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s policy won't end the debate, but it offers a way forward that most Americans can support. It's called More Choices, More Life. The policy will dramatically reduce abortion in this country, and it will do so by offering more choices for women and families, not less. A lot of women, when they get pregnant, feel they can't afford to have a baby. There isn't a lot of support to raise a child in this society. You can't call yourself pro-life if you are concerned only with this talking point, only with life before birth. What about after birth? We have to make our society as welcoming as possible to children and to motherhood. By the way, that's the position of all pro-life people. Don't let them gaslight you and state that just because someone doesn't believe that government, huge government bureaucracy involved with throwing money at a problem is the only way to fix it. Or that's the only way to take care of children. It's not. Okay. The centerpiece of More Choices, More Life is a massive subsidized daycare initiative. Okay. We will safeguard women's reproductive rights while redirecting the funds being spent on the war in Ukraine. Okay, I'm going to skip over that. Lots of money. Throwing lots of money at the problem. That's what he says. All right. Universal child care has the potential to add $1 trillion to our GDP. Okay. On top of this policy, we will also strengthen our adoption infrastructure to make it the best in the world. We will increase the child tax credit, and we will fund sanctuaries for women in need to have babies, places like Auntie Angie's house. where they get support not just in pregnancy and birth, but also in those precious months afterwards. That way their only choice isn't abortion. They have another choice, a viable choice to give birth. Okay. Increasing the child tax credit, I'm okay with that. And limiting the regulations on adoption, I'm okay with that. Shutting down adoption agencies because you disagree with their placing policies is also one thing that could help fix that problem. Robert F. Kennedy will never compromise America's freedoms to solve our nation's problems. We can have more choices and more life. We can, but and we should do things that will, especially outside of the government, that will help with the choice of having the child. But also, obviously, I'm not in support of abortions in most cases. And so there you go. Fortunately, there is a lot we can do to reduce abortions by choice, not by force. As president, Robert F. Kennedy will make it easier for women to choose life. He will give them more choices than they have today, and we will see a lot fewer abortions and a lot more flourishing families. There you go. There's his position. Every American can be an energy entrepreneur. Okay. America has an opportunity to set an example for the world by creating a true free market for energy, replacing the current marketplace that is riddled with rules written by polluters and designed to reward those who use the dirtiest fuels. I'm assuming this is just freeing up regulations on people who want to set up their own energy, such as windmills and solar and that sort of thing. I'm very supportive of this. And maybe I'll come back to it in a later video. It's a very long section, and this video is already way too long. Yeah, it looks like there's some talk about the false environmental solutions, meaning that a lot of these things aren't the solution that people think they are. Okay. Tax fairness. This is short and sweet. Let's see. I think we might be on the same page here. The tax burden on America's middle class and working poor must be reduced. As President, Robert F. Kennedy will propose a revenue-neutral plan that helps both the lower and middle classes, subsidized not by raising rates on high-income households, but rather by closing loopholes and eliminating deductions that only benefit the wealthy. I'm here for this. Kennedy's plan to achieve tax fairness will be double the child tax credit. I'm okay with that. Restore the personal exemption of $5,000. Okay. All right. Increase the standard deduction and eliminate carried interest loopholes. So just so you guys understand what happened with the, and I know we're getting long here, but taxes, I can't help myself. Okay, so what happened under Trump's tax cuts? One of the things is they simplified the tax system. They simplified the form that you complete, the main form that you complete. There are multiple sub-forms now because of that. But they simplified the main form that you complete. One of the things they did was they combined the standard deduction and the exemption. And not only did they do that, but they converted the exemption into credits, right? So I don't know if he just doesn't quite understand that, or if he really does want to leave all that in place and then also bring back the exemption credit. Not sure I agree with that, making the system more complicated and going backwards rather than forwards. Seems interesting to me. But restore the personal exemption. Okay. Increase the standard deduction. Okay. All right. I'm not completely opposed to either one of those. I just think maybe he doesn't quite understand what happened. But maybe he does. Increasing the standard deduction, I wouldn't be totally opposed to that either. Whatever reduces the tax burden on the people, I do support that. I just think it should be through simplifying, not through more things. But, okay. Increasing the standard deduction. Eliminate the carried interest loophole. That's interesting. I wouldn't be opposed to that, because it's one of the more complicated aspects of the tax law, and getting rid of some of that is not terrible. But yeah, basically it's one of the things that people use to eliminate their tax burdens. So one of the loopholes. There are many loopholes that they could be looking at like that, though. But he's keeping it simple. So in general, I am with closing the loopholes, not raising rates. If you raise income tax rates, you are not guaranteeing increased revenue. You close loopholes, you are guaranteeing increased tax revenue. Okay. Well, okay, so guarantee is a strong word, because they could just quit and then they wouldn't have anything to pay taxes on. But you're more likely to get a tax revenue increase by reducing and eliminating loopholes than you are by increasing the tax rate. It's just a fact. All right, moving on. So close to finishing. All right, recovering America with healing farms. Oh, okay, so this is his thing about the healing farms. Oh, there is so much here. Maybe I'll do like separate videos on some of these that were interesting, but just too much for this type of video. But let's see. We're going to build healing centers in communities across the nation, places that help empower a generation beset by depression, PTSD, loneliness, addiction, and mental illness, where they can reconnect with nature and recover. Sounds to me like, so I didn't quite understand this the first time that I read it in his policy, so he may want to try to like do that a little better, so that, because coming down here you're getting more detail, so that's great, but I didn't quite understand what he was saying previously. So what it sounds like is maybe he thinks that if he has addiction centers where people are working on their addiction problems by taking care of these farms and creating these whole foods that could be distributed out, and causing more of these whole food type farms, these organic's a rough word, but anyways, these farms, local farms for local communities that are operated by people who are working on their mental and mental health issues and their addictions. I can see some issues there, but it seems like a fine concept. It's weird for a presidential campaign, but he's not your usual candidate, so I get that. All right, let's touch on some things here. Let's see. Taxing marijuana. Okay, let's read that. Healing farms will be funded by a federal tax on marijuana with no net cost. Interesting. Enrollment is free the moment a participant arrives, with no time limit on recovery. Interesting. The wait list, referrals, and prohibitive costs of private treatment centers are avoided, and so are the risks that addicts so often succumb to, losing their motivation to heal and retreating to the cycle of use and despair. Instead, healing farms will foster community and provide their guests with a fresh start on life. Seems like a passion project for him. I wonder if he had to go through something like this at some point. Today, the largest industry in America's depressed rural areas is the prison industrial complex. Since the 1980s, the U.S. has built prisons in these communities to house Americans' young people who have been devastated by the drug crisis. Isn't it time to turn our national attention to healing instead? Healing farms will foster community and bring a healthy new industry to rural America areas and forgotten corners of America. And then federal parity law. The 2008 federal parity law requires insurers to cover illness of the brain, such as addiction or depression, no more restrictively than illness to the body. Okay. President Kennedy will protect the health and well-being of American people and aggressively enforce parity laws. So basically, forcing insurance companies to cover mental issues as opposed to physical issues. Okay. it's always tough to force insurance companies to do these sorts of things and like expect costs to remain reasonable. But I get the idea, right? I get the idea that mental health is health and should be an aspect of health insurance. But maybe we need to create different health insurance, maybe a physical health insurance and a mental health insurance as two separate entities. Maybe I don't know. That was just a thought that just came to me. Making marijuana being legal and having a tax assessed on it. Taxes are assessed on goods in general. Having a special marijuana tax that specifically funds this seems a little weird to me, but yes, there would be taxes on marijuana sold legally. I get it. So maybe designating that. It's tough to see like specific taxes designated to specific things because it almost never happens and it just always goes into the money pit, as it were. Just look at Social Security, which was something he didn't really touch on in his platform. I really wish these candidates would touch on that. Anyways, I think that's the last topic. Let me check one more time here. Tax fairness. Recovery in America. Yep, that's the last thing on here. This video is super long, so I do want to cut it and move on. I would like to maybe do a video on what I think should be the policies that are addressed in these platforms. There's some things that are super important that don't seem to get touched on nearly enough, but he did touch on some really cool things, some really outside of the pocket things, probably stuff that's passion projects for him. So anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I really wish he was going to be on the debate tomorrow. You'll be watching this probably tomorrow, so the debate today for you, but for me, the debate will be tomorrow. I wish he was there, but we will see how it goes. All right, everybody, take care. Have a good day.